Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the Saints Insider Podcast. Today is Wednesday, September the 13th. I'm Zach Ewing, Rod Walker, Jeff Duncan, and Luke Johnson alongside. It's been a couple of days since we spoke to you. A Monday Night Football week means an extra day off. Of course, that means everything gets squeezed next week, both for us and for the team. But we are here, and we're ready to kind of recap our final thoughts on Saints versus Titans and start looking ahead to Saints Panthers. Plenty of other stuff as well. We might even have a little conversation about the turf and the Superdome that has to do with the turf conversation going around the NFL after Aaron Rodgers' injury on this week's Monday Night Football, and to talk about several other things too, our Week 1 impressions from the NFL. So, number one thing, of course, the Saints beat the Titans 16-15. As we welcome you in to the Saints Insider Podcast, brought to you by Bank Plus. You guys have spent the last couple days probably trying to get some rest, but also rewatching parts or all of this game. Jeff, let's go to you first. What were your impressions sort of the second time around watching this thing on tape? More or less optimistic about the Saints' performance?
I think more. I came away really impressed with Derek Carr's game. I thought, Mickey Loomis on his show on WWL Radio last night said that he thought he made some throws in that game that they haven't seen from the quarterback position in a couple of years, and I would agree with him. I mean, they've had some big-time throws from Dalton and Jameis Winston, but not in clutch moments like that when they needed them. And I thought his ability to read the defense, make some really critical big arm throws. I mean, I just came away really impressed with him. We know the defense is good. I wasn't too impressed with Tennessee's execution on offense, especially at quarterback, or their game plan. It sounds like Derrick Henry was a little limited in that game that we didn't know about. That's why his usage was down. But nevertheless, getting their hands on so many balls, intercepting 3 passes, that was something they didn't do a year ago. So that's a really encouraging sign. And I thought the pass rush also got after Ryan Tannehill and forced him into some of those issues. So I came away feeling even more impressed than I was during the game.
Yeah, I want to dig in just a little bit to Derek Carr's kind of advanced statistics as well. But first off, Luke, how about you? Kind of the second time around watching some things on tape, what else did you pick up?
Yeah, not to echo Dunk too much, but I was really impressed with Derek Carr as well. I mean, when you think about the fact that they rushed for 69 yards as a team on 2.6 yards a pop, they let Carr get sacked 4 times in the first half, and he was really pressured throughout the game. For him to go out there and throw for 300 yards, throw for a touchdown, almost have another one. I think there's been a couple of replays floating around showing Rashid Shaheed had 2 knees in, so maybe he should have had a second touchdown. Look, I thought it was a really, really good performance from him, and I think we're only going to see the offense get better around him. And if he can keep up what he showed in Week 1, I mean, I feel really, really good about the Saints this year, especially because what we saw on defense was phenomenal. Like they did have their kind of usual early season, let's call it brain farts for this defense, right? It seems like every year, first couple of weeks in the season, they give up like a 60 or 70 yard touchdown or 2 in a game. And I mean, the Titans had 2 of them wide open on a flea flicker play. And then again, when Tajay Spears got behind the Saints defense, but you're lucky for the Saints, neither of them hit, and the Saints got their hands on a lot of balls and actually made some picks. Jeff referenced the 3 interceptions. It took them 13 games to get 3 interceptions last year. So I feel really good about where this team's at. There are some obvious significant flaws, but on the second watch through, I think there's some things that really, where you could see those flaws kind of rising up a little bit, and you could see the good stuff they did being made even better by that.
All right, so we're 2 for 2 on positivity, and I'll throw myself in that camp too. Rod, since we gave you your flowers last week, we have to say you were the only guy who picked the Saints to lose this game. So when you went back and looked, what were your impressions?
Yeah, well, I think there were some things that could have gone the other way, and this game probably could have gone either way. You look at just those plays that Luke mentioned, but I mean, the Saints were able to gut out a win. It says a lot about them, especially in that last drive. This is a team that could not run the ball. Like Lou mentioned, they only averaged 2.6 yards a carry. This is a Saints team that couldn't run the ball, and they knew they were going to have to throw the ball, to keep the ball away from Tennessee, and they were able to go out and do it. So, I think that says a lot about this team. But going back to the running game, I mean, that's something that even before this game, throughout the preseason, we kind of talked about how the running game had struggled. They didn't do well in the preseason, and they carried over into week 1. They didn't run the ball well. Obviously, they don't have Alvin Kamara yet, so he'll be able to help with that. But I think a lot of that was, you're playing they may not play a run defense as good as the one they played Sunday, so that's a good thing, when you look at it. But they didn't run the ball well, and obviously, Trevor Penning had his issues there in the first half, and the second half, it seems like the Saints gave him some help, and some of that pressure that came on Derek Carr was gone in the second half. So they'll have to improve at the left tackle position, and they'll have to improve the running game. But outside of that, I thought there was a lot to be pleased about.
Yeah, I think Trevor Penning, an obvious concern. I do think in the second half, whatever they were doing to kind of help him out and chip rushers or whatever seemed to be working. And I went and looked, guys, and there's all sorts of advanced stats you can use. But the one that stuck out to me, Derek Carr averaged 6.5 air yards per attempt, which basically means that's how many yards the ball was in the air on average. So not run after the catch. That it means basically they were throwing downfield a lot more than we're used to. That was the second highest air yards per attempt in the NFL in week 1. Tua Tagovailoa was at 7, and we saw what he did through for 466 yards. And last year, the Saints quarterbacks were closer to 4 air yards per attempt. And even Derek Carr was at like 4.5. So it's way more than he usually has done. You see the stats on the screen here, threw for 305 yards, a lot of those downfield. Super aggressive aerial attack. Is that just the opponent? The Titans had kind of a beat up secondary. Is that something we can expect to see more of this season? Are the Saints kind of abandoning this really conservative offensive philosophy we've seen the last few years, or was this just a one-off, Doug?
Well, I think it's a little bit of all those things. I mean, I think the Saints knew they were going to be beating their head against the wall trying to run into that defensive front, without Alvin Kamara. So we kind of called that before the game. I think they just played to their strengths, and their strengths in these matchups were their receivers, tight end Juwan Johnson and Derek Carr at quarterback. And I think it played out that way. I mean, Tennessee's got a good defense. Their secondary is not exactly, I don't think, filled with elite players, and certainly not elite athletes. And this was an area where I thought the Saints had a decided advantage in speed, and we saw that. I mean, Christian Fulton, I think, tweaked a hamstring in the game, and the Saints took advantage of that. I mean, Sheed ran right by him on that last big play. There was just no comparison in the speed. So I think we saw a couple of times Chris Olave use his speed to get open. The Titans are kind of built like a street fighter, a big bully. They're physical, but they're not filled with speed. And I think the Saints on that turf, on that fast track, took advantage of that in some certain areas. But that's not always, I think, going to be the case every matchup they have this year, but it played out that way on Sunday.
I don't know. I think I'm going to counter that a little bit. I think their team speed at the skill position spots is probably at least one of the best in the NFC. It's got to be up there, man. I mean, Rashid Shaheed is sprinter fast. Chris Olave, he's a guy who timed under 4.4 in the 40, and he plays like it. That deep ball, I went back and watched it today, that him and Carr missed out on. I think traveled like 60 plus yards in the air, and Carr underthrew him. Like Olave was trying to split the safeties, and those guys just had no chance of keeping up with them. So I think that the vertical passing element is going to be part of the Saints attack throughout the season. I don't know if we're going to see him just consistently like lead the NFL or be up at the top of the NFL in these air yards categories, just because it's not what we've seen historically out of this offense. But I think they're going to take advantage of their speed. I think they're smart to do it because it's something that they haven't had in a long time here. And I think Pete Carmichael knows he's got to use his guys' best traits.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to go back to probably Ted Ginn Jr. before, the last time the Saints had somebody this fast. And, I was looking at the stats, and there were like 6 pass plays of 40 yards or more in the NFL in week 1. And 2 of them were by the Saints, and this is obviously by receivers. But, yeah, I think they're going to utilize that speed. They've talked in the offseason about getting the ball in the hands of their speedsters and letting them make plays. And I think we're gonna see that a little bit more this season. And I think once they get the running game going, it's gonna really open up that even more.
Yeah, and also don't forget that Derek Carr showed a really good ability to kind of extend plays, and I think that's going to open up some big play opportunities for this team as well.
Another one, Chris Olave probably was interfered with earlier in the fourth quarter on a deep ball, and that didn't get called, and so that could have been another deep shot the Saints could have either connected on or gotten penalty yards on. The NFL had Derek mic'd up. And there's a great video floating around. We have it on NOLA.com/Saints if you haven't seen it, of Derek sort of setting up the go route to Rashid Shaheed late in the fourth quarter that didn't quite clinch the game, but all but clinched the game for them. Gets them a first down on a critical third down, got him in field goal range, eventually allowed him to run the clock out. And he's talking about a go route. I thought the funniest part of the whole video might have been Jameis Winston's cameo, where he just says go route to Shaheed, and Jameis says yes. As if Jameis has ever said no to a go route in his life. But, it just goes to show the attitude, though. I mean, we're talking about, is this an every week thing? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on the personnel advantages and things like that in the game plan. But it does seem, and you wrote about this, Luke, after the game, like it's just the attitude is much more aggressive.
Yeah. Count the times in the last 2 years on one hand where the Saints put the game in the quarterback's hand at the end of the game to win it. I mean, you're not going to use any fingers. It was like going back and watching this team while Drew was here, right? And obviously, like again, I don't want to be comparing Derek Carr to Drew Brees. They're different players at different stages of their careers. Drew Brees is a clear first ballot Hall of Famer. But I just think it is a completely different mentality in a football team, from the head coach down to the 53rd guy on the roster, when you have a quarterback you can trust in the fourth quarter. I mean, it's a different Dennis Allen than we've seen in his 18 games as a head coach now. He never did it last year, never would have done it last year. Didn't want to put the game in his quarterback's hands. He's like, our defense is going to win the game. And that's honestly, I was watching the game unfold, and I'm just like, is he going to do it again? Is he going to make them burn their timeouts and run into a brick wall 3 straight times and trust his defense to protect 40 yards of field? And I'm really thankful and surprised that we got to see them just let Derek Carr let it loose, and it just means they have a lot of trust in this quarterback. I think that's why it's going to be a fun year for this team.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's refreshing for Saints fans to see that. It's refreshing for us who just watch the team every week. And Valerie's got a comment. Yeah, that interception, terrible decision. And Derek owned that. I mean, he wasn't perfect. But I do think it's a good spot to kind of segue into next week's game. And Saints and Panthers, as we're here on Saints Insider podcast, brought to you by Bank Plus. Saints play in Carolina, 6:15 p.m. Monday. It's an hour earlier than a regular Monday night game. So public service announcement on that, since there's the Monday night doubleheader this week. And no injury reports yet for a Monday night game. We don't get those till Thursday, but we do know the Panthers will be without their top corner, J.C. Horn, who Frank Reich, their head coach, said he's going to need surgery. His hamstring injury is that serious. So we know for sure he won't play. I don't know. Atlanta didn't. You talk about air yards per attempt. Atlanta was like last in the NFL on Sunday. They didn't push it downfield at all against Carolina. So maybe we see that again. Rod, I don't know. We talk about the offensive line too. I mean, Brian Burns is another concern. He's been banged up, but he did play in week 1. So in a lot of ways, this sets up as a similar test for that Saints offense.
Yeah, and Brian Burns, he had, I think, 2 sacks against the Falcons. Derek Brown had a sack. They're a team that's, they can get to the quarterback, as they showed last week. And this is a game that I think we're all just interested in it because it's Bryce Young's debut at home. And so the Panther fans will be really fired up for this game and Monday night game. And I think the Saints will have to, fix some of the things that we saw last week in order to, come out 2-0. This is a Carolina team that swept the Saints last season, which hadn't happened in a long time. So there are some things in this game that you're really going to be interested in seeing how it unfolds.
Yeah, look, I think Carolina also is going to be very desperate, right? Last thing they want to do is start 0-2. They're going to be at home from their home fans, Monday Night Football. Bryce Young's debut. I mean, there's just a lot of things that go into that game. I thought he played pretty well when I watched the game. I mean, he had two obvious kind of rookie mistakes with those interceptions. But the really killer play for them was a fumble that they had by the way. I think they were tied up at the time and they ran the ball really well, I thought, with the running scheme behind that offensive line. But the two turnovers and then a fumble, I think near midfield, kind of got the ball rolling for Atlanta, and they were able to pull away. But I think Bryce Young, these are learning experiences for him. I think they showed a stat during the game. I don't think any rookie quarterback won this past weekend. And I think the last 15 rookie quarterbacks that have started in the NFL, I think there was 1 in 14 or something crazy, some really bad stats. So those things are going to happen with him. I think the Saints are going to get after him and give him some problems, but he is a much shiftier runner. I mean, he's very slick in the pocket, gets outside the pocket, extends plays a lot like Derek Carr did the other night. And that could be a much bigger threat to run than Ryan Tannehill was. So I do think he's going to pose some problems for the Saints.
Yeah, and I personally just think that they got to be on the lookout for that running game too. I think Carolina's got a really, really good running game, even if they don't have Christian McCaffrey. And the last thing that worries me about the Panthers is Bryce Young covering up the secondary, just because I don't think they have very good weapons at receiver. And the Saints secondary, I think, is obviously one of the strengths of the team. But they can stay in this game if they kind of control the lines of scrimmage, much the way Tennessee did, week one. So it's just got to be on the lookout there, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing you talk about, Jeff, desperate teams. I don't have the exact stat in front of me, but teams that are 0-1 historically in the NFL facing a 1-0 team, there is absolutely something to that desperation factor. I think they have a 650 winning percentage. I mean, they win well more than 50% of the time, which is what you'd expect, all things. In fact, you might even expect less than that, considering the 0-1 teams are probably the worst, generally worse teams than the 1-0 teams. But it doesn't work that way. So Saints will be going in to face a desperate team. We mentioned Bryce Young. I know, Jeff, you're working on a story about how the Saints have fared against rookie quarterbacks. I went back and looked up just against number one draft picks. The Saints have faced 11 of them all time. They faced both Jameis Winston and Cam Newton twice in those seasons, and so a total of 13 games. And they're 10-3 in those 13 games. So pretty successful historically. But what did you find out as you kind of done some research on that?
Well, I think the number I saw was 10-2 all time, and one of those wins people will remember it really has an asterisk by it because the rookie quarterback was Allen, I think, with Carolina when the Saints rested their starters in the last game of the 2019 season or 2020 season. So that game really shouldn't even count. The only one that is beating them was Jalen Hurts. We all remember that game a couple of years ago in Philadelphia when they had a couple of really long runs. I think Hurts and I can't remember what running back it was. Each had 100 yards rushing. But otherwise, the Saints have pretty much there was a really strong performance by Justin Herbert in the Dome. The Saints won the game, but Herbert threw for 4 touchdown passes. But otherwise, very few guys have even thrown a touchdown pass against the Saints. Their pass defense will give, I think, Bryce Young all kinds of problems. It'll be interesting to see if DJ Chark, I think he's still out. He didn't play last week. I mean, he was signed to be their kind of number one receiver. He was out. You mentioned J.C. Horn being out. I think they're going to be very limited, like Luke said. They're going to, in the past, we've seen them. We've gone to games there where they've manufactured some points. I think they've, had a running back throw a pass once to the tight end. We saw that play last week. Luke mentioned that the Titans had a flea flicker that was wide open. I could see something like that out of Frank Reich, just trying to catch the Saints, who are very aggressive in their pursuit, catch them out of alignment for a play, because I just don't see the Panthers lining up and marching 75, 80 yards on the Saints defense. They're just too limited up front, I think.
One thing about those stats against those number one quarterbacks, I mean, a lot of times those number one guys are coming in on a really, really bad football team. And that's not the case with the Panthers. I mean, this is a Panthers team that was close to making the playoffs last year and made the trade, to get the number one overall pick. So I do think they're better than your normal team with a top overall draft pick. So just something to consider when you look at those numbers on how the Saints did. So.
And the Titans, the Panthers have some intel, right? I mean, they've got Calvin Throckmorton, Andy Dalton, and Shai Tuttle all on the roster. So those guys obviously very familiar with the personnel and the Saints schemes. So sometimes that stuff's overrated, but I think in this instance, with a new coaching staff in Carolina, it'll be helpful for them.
It's a division opponent, somebody they see every year twice, and so they will definitely be familiar with some of the things they're seeing.
It's never going to be easy. I think the Panthers also down, was it their left guard they lost this week in that game? And so they're down at least one offensive lineman as well. I have an interesting question here from Glenn, who's watching live. Can we assume Taysom Hill will have a very limited role this year, similar to last year? Has to be a place Carmichael can work him in more frequently. I mean, I'll say, guys, and I want to hear everybody chime in, but Taysom Hill, when he comes in the game, every now and then you've got to show a pass play. I mean, you just have to. It's gotten to the point where he comes in and everybody knows it's going to be a direct snap and a run. And when people know it's coming, it's just not that effective.
Well, I kind of want to first take a second to dispute Glenn's point a little bit. Taysom Hill set a career high in rushing yards last year. And he also ended up catching a pair of touchdown passes last year, and they let him throw the ball a little bit out of that kind of funky package where they bring him in and take the starting quarterback off the field. I think that's more what we're going to see out of him this year. I think they finally figured out that's exactly how they want to use him. We didn't see it a lot this week against Tennessee, but I think that's more matchup dependent, and I think that's going to be the fluctuation we see this year. It's not going to be every game Taysom gets 10 or 13 touches or whatever the case may be. I think it's going to be completely matchup dependent, but they are going to use him a lot because he's clearly one of their best, most dynamic offensive players. And he's a really important part of their offense.
And that's something Dennis Allen talked about the other day. He was, asked about Taysom's not getting a lot of touches. And, this team just has so many weapons. There are going to be games when, Michael Thomas might not get as many targets as he got, because you got Taysom, you got Olave, you got Shaheed, you'll have Alvin Kamara. So, there's only one football. So everybody can't touch it 7 or 8 times a game because there's just not enough plays for that. So I think you're going to see games like this when Taysom doesn't touch a lot, and you'll see some when he touches a little bit more than that.
Seems kind of a fantasy football manager's nightmare. I mean, you're just not sure who's going to get the production. And Luke, to your point, that game against Seattle last year, I'm not sure any Saints offensive player had a better single game than Taysom Hill did against the Seahawks last year. I mean, he won that game for them. So it could certainly be, a possibility this year. A couple other things I want to get to before we sign off. And Sean brings up one of them here with Peyton Turner is going to be out a while with turf toe. He needs surgery. Good one here. Peyton, can we assume Isaiah Foskey will be the next man up, or are they looking outside the building? They did sign a defensive end to the practice squad today. So Luke, we know they are at least looking for depth.
Yeah, and I would imagine they'll be kind of trolling the free agent waters, for the foreseeable future. Look, it's going to be, probably a couple months until Peyton Turner is able to even get back to practicing, let alone playing. And we saw they said it was a similar injury to Trevor Penning last year, and that kept him out from September to November, mid-November. And even then, they didn't bring him back into the starting lineup. So, that long-winded way of saying, I think that Foskey is going to eventually get his chance. I just don't know if it's going to be immediately. There's not really a whole lot of free agent options out there, unsigned. So, I think they're going to have to just kind of roll with what they have right now in the practice squad and elevating guys. Kyle Phillips was the guy they signed today from the practice squad to the 53. But the majority of it, I think, is still going to be Cam Jordan, Carl Granderson, Tano Passanio, and figure it out from there.
Terrell Lewis was the defensive end, former Bears defensive end they signed to the practice squad today as they elevated Kyle Phillips. So that was the move today. The other thing was they tried out 5 defensive backs yesterday, and it's normal for teams to bring in players for tryouts each week when they have an off day. But it was interesting, guys, to see 5 defensive backs. Is there maybe Alontae Taylor briefly left the game? Marshawn Lattimore left for like 2 plays. They both came back in. But is there any concern defensive back wise?
I mean, there's always a concern for me if there's that many that many guys from one position group coming in on tryouts. There could be something that we just didn't catch on to in the game, something that happened and maybe on one of those last plays. I think it's definitely a concern until we get out there practice tomorrow and take attendance.
I was just going to say, one of the things that I was encouraged by in the game was not just the play of the frontline guys, but, Ike Ottom had that big time play on the deep ball. They went right at him as soon as he got in the game. And, a big interception there kind of turned the momentum. And then even Ugo Imadi had a nice play. So they didn't play a ton of snaps, but it's the same thing we saw in preseason. Those guys can hold up. I mean, there's a lot of confidence in them. So even if they did have, say, an injury to somebody we don't know about right now, I'd feel okay with those guys because I know it's one thing to play 40 snaps compared to a handful, but I thought those guys played well in the little limited role they got.
Yeah, they have some depth there. It's still obviously you don't want to lose a big one. Got some chatter out here. Keyshawn Johnson picking the Saints versus the Ravens in the Super Bowl. Michael Thomas is his nephew, so maybe that's part of that. We're going to get into our Week 1 NFL impressions around the league here in a second. One more thing I wanted to touch on, and this is something you've been chasing too, Jeff. The NFLPA sent out a missive this morning saying, hey, they want grass in every NFL stadium. And this comes after some of the Jets players complaining about the artificial turf, contributing possibly to Aaron Rodgers' Achilles injury on Monday night. Is it even possible to put grass in the Superdome? Is this something the NFL could force? I mean, it just seems like the Saints are the least likely team to do this.
Well, it's possible, but it's highly unlikely. I mean, it'd be very expensive. I'm waiting to talk to some of the Superdome officials about it, but they didn't really want to get into it, as you can imagine, because it's a touchy subject with the Players Association. But it's a very expensive proposition. This building isn't built like, say, the one that we saw over in London, Tottenham Hotspur, where they able to interchange field turf and natural grass fields, and the same out in Arizona. It's doesn't have that same type of apparatus inside. So I know they've talked about bringing the like World Rugby Championships to the Dome, and I don't know if that's going to involve grass or not. I think they've done it once before, but to do it for an NFL season, I think would be very problematic. But look, it is an issue. I mean, I asked Dennis Allen about it the other day, especially these turf toes, which is what Peyton Turner had. If you remember last year, that's what Trevor Penning had early in preseason. It sidelined him for a while. I think Deontay Hardy had that as well last season. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I think they've almost had at least one player each year out with a turf toe for a significant period of time. Sometimes they require surgery, sometimes they don't. But it is something you're going to have to deal with. But the league will always come back, and they've already come out with statements today saying the science shows that there's really no difference. Now, people may argue with that, but they do study it pretty intensely, and that's at least that's their fallback every time.
It feels, Rod, like this could be an overreaction to a Hall of Fame player, being lost in the league's biggest media market 4 plays into the season, and people are looking for something to blame.
Yeah, I mean, you have to think that it happens 2 days after Aaron Rodgers, 3-time MVP, gets hurt. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think anything will come of this. I think it's something that you have to throw it out there, I guess, if some players are complaining about it, but I don't think anything will ever come out of it.
The NFL does make rule changes because of star players getting hurt, though. I mean,
that's true.
You can't hit quarterbacks below the knees anymore because of the injury that happened to Tom Brady a couple of years back, or about a decade ago, I guess. The NFL does make big changes to the rule book at the very least because of player injuries. But I think this is a completely different animal, as Duncan.
Yeah, look at, and I think that injury to Rodgers would have happened on any surface. I mean, it was people tear Achilles all the time. It's just one of those injuries, especially guys as old as Aaron Rodgers. Is kind of well known, but the turf toe, I think, is something different that you're always going to deal with. That's why it's got the name. But I do agree. I don't think it's going to go anywhere.
Yeah, it just seems the Superdome is probably the most obvious one, but there may be some other stadiums that are older where it's difficult to put in grass too. So I don't know. We'll see if that goes anywhere. But that was probably the biggest story from week 1 around the NFL was Aaron Rodgers' injury. He's out for the season, 4 plays into his Jets career. But the Jets come back and win that game on a walk-off punt return. What else stuck out to you guys from week 1 around the NFL? Rod, let's start with you. Just general impressions, surprises. We won't mention the Steelers unless you want to. But other than that.
I think that one of the surprises for me was, and obviously we didn't get to see a lot of games because we're in the dome watching the Saints, but I was surprised to see Tampa Bay win. This is a team that I thought was going to be awful this season. And for them to go to Minnesota and get a win, I thought was very impressive. I mean, this is the NFC South was pretty bad last year. I think I looked it up. They won 7 games last year against teams that were with winning records or playoff teams from last year. But 4 of those were against the Seattle Seahawks. So they really didn't beat a lot of teams outside the division. I mean, we all know how bad the NFC South was. So just to see Tampa Bay get off to a good start with Baker Mayfield, and I think they play the Bears Sunday. So this is a team that has a chance to go, 2-0 to start the season, and I don't think any of us would have predicted that. So they were probably that score probably surprised me the most, and I thought just how convincing Dallas was against the Giants. I thought that was really impressive.
Luke, how about you? Week 1 NFL impressions from what you were able to see outside of the Saints.
Should I steal Duncan's thunder and spend the whole time talking about how good the Cowboys are?
Yeah, go right ahead.
No. Look, I think the thing that really stuck out to me outside of the star quarterbacks like Joe Burrow and Josh Allen really struggling in week 1, I think the thing that really stood out was the San Francisco 49ers just like continuing to look like a juggernaut, no matter who's at quarterback. I mean, I was one of the people who was kind of like poo-pooing Bryce Purdy coming into the year, and then he just like goes out there and carves up a really, really, really good Pittsburgh secondary. I mean, those guys look really scary for any other NFC team, Saints included. Saints played them tough last year, but man, I think the 49ers are, right now probably my favorite out of the NFC if Purdy continues playing anywhere even remotely close to that. And then there was one other thing I wanted to say. Jordan Love. I thought he had a really, really nice week 1 performance, which, isn't great news for the Saints who go and play Green Bay in a couple weeks. But I was really impressed with him and the Packers just kind of not skipping a beat despite, moving on from a Hall of Fame quarterback. How crazy would it be if they were able to, just make it 3 in a row where they just have really amazing quarterback play there for, from 3 guys for over a span of 40 years. It's pretty nuts.
Yeah, the highest passer ratings in the NFL on week 1 were Jordan Love, who didn't throw for a ton of yards, but 3 touchdowns and no picks. Desmond Ridder, who really didn't take any chances, and then Brock Purdy was number 3, right ahead of Tua, as you mentioned.
Desmond Ridder finished the first quarter with 0 passing yards on like 4.
Yeah, I don't know how you get. Yeah, talk about all-time conservative.
Yeah, this is why small sample sizes are a thing. I was not impressed with Desmond Ridder at all. He had more catches, albeit he caught a batted ball, so it wasn't like he was targeted. He had more catches than Drake London in that game. Drake London and Kyle Pitts combined for 2 catches. Like those guys are freaks, and they're not throwing him the ball. That was so. I mean, I know Atlanta won the game, but you're not going to get far if that's the kind of offense you're playing in the modern NFL.
Yeah, and I'll also add in. I'm sorry, Jeff. While we're talking about NFC South teams, the Bucks, surprising win. Vikings outgained them by like 2.3 yards per play. It was one of the biggest gaps in yards per play in the entire NFL on Sunday. And so maybe kind of a fluky win there for Tampa Bay. We'll see what going forward. But yeah, small sample size, but that's what we're doing. We're reacting to it. So Jeff, tell us why the Cowboys are going to win the Super Bowl.
Well, it reminded me of when the Saints opened the season in 2009, their Super Bowl season. They just destroyed the Lions. I think it was like 49 to something. And, they took the foot off the gas by the end of the third quarter. That's what really elite teams do. I think the Cowboys are clearly an elite team, but I agree with Luke on the Packers. That was something that stood out to me, especially since the Saints have to go there in a week. That was a game that at one time I was thinking, it could be a real 50-50 game, which I guess it still can, but it's even tougher now after seeing the way the Packers handled them. The defense played really good for Green Bay as well. And then the Rams surprised me, and the Rams went to Seattle and just destroyed Seattle. I think they scored on their last 5 or 6 possessions. And that's a game when I looked at the schedule at the beginning of the year, I was like, well, that's a Saints win. And now, who knows? I mean, we'll see how the season plays out. It's later in the year, but looks a little more difficult today than it did a week ago. And going to the Atlanta game, I agree with Luke. I was not impressed with Atlanta's passing attack at all. I mean, their best plays were throwing screens out to Bijan Robinson, letting him go to work. That guy is a stud. I mean, he is special. I'm talking about like real special. He's going to be, I think, a Pro Bowl player this year. And if they lean on him and Tyler Allgeier, their other running back, I mean, to go with those receivers and tight end, I mean, they're not going to be an easy out. They've got a very easy schedule early in the season. Their defense played better. So I think there's someone to watch in the NFC South.
Yeah, take a look at the Saints schedule here. 4 of the next 5 on the road. Talk about a desperate Carolina team. Green Bay looking better. New England played Philadelphia tough. Tampa Bay won its game. So this schedule that looked so super easy, I'm not going to go so far as to say it all of a sudden looks to be difficult, but some of those games trickier than they look on paper when you're looking in July. All right, that'll do it for us. We're going to be back on Friday. We'll have a full preview of Saints Panthers Monday Night Football, and we will we've got a couple other surprises for you. So tune into the Saints Insider podcast coming up 3:30 p.m. on Friday, and that will be brought to you by Bank Plus, just like this one is. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, everybody. Drop us a 5-star review. Hit the like button. Subscribe to the Saints on NOLA.com YouTube channel if you haven't already. We appreciate each and every one of you. For Rod Walker, Jeff Duncan, and Luke Johnson, I'm Zach Ewing. Thanks for watching Saints Insider.